A lot of people are very frightened when they hear the term defund the police or abolish the police. And I totally understand, because I agree. We need some sort of enforcement because there are criminals out there. We do need people who can come in emergency to help protect us. But these terms are used to talk about how after 9/11 and the Patriot Act, and in recent years, we've actually sent a bunch of military equipment to local cops. And then we see in these protests them driving through the crowds. We see them shooting rubber bullets, tear gas, in incredibly frightening military outfits, no badges, not telling anybody who they are, pulling up in unmarked vans, taking protesters off the streets, not telling them if they're being arrested, why they're being arrested, reading them their rights, and then once they arrest them, not even telling them where they're going. So, or the people that are with them, how to get these people that they're kidnapping back, because it is not an arrest if you don't tell the person why they're being arrested and you do not identify yourself. It is a kidnapping if you do not do those things, especially in an unmarked uniform in an unmarked car. So people are angry. Not only were there Jim Crow laws, not only were Confederate statues erected during Jim Crow, not after the Confederacy. These statues that everybody's talking about them being our heritage, they weren't put up during the Confederacy. Well, most of them. They were put up during Jim Crow to remind Black people that they are being crushed. The people who are wanting these statues to come down are not crazy. They're wanting to remove these symbols of oppression that were erected to be oppressive. They were not erected to honor these racists. So there are a lot of things to be upset about as a Black individual in this country. I remember when Juneteenth hit that there were a lot of people who were very frightened. Juneteenth is a celebration for when the slaves were freed. Juneteenth is a celebration. And people were frightened because we went into an area that had many, many Black shop owners, and we massacred them. Just killed them all off. So those were the people who had property. So that's another part of our history, and if we don't recognize those things, then yeah, if you're a poor white person, you're gonna be like, hey, I don't see any privilege. Can I enact this white privilege? I could use some privilege right now. Please give me my privilege. And I think that the term white privilege is a bit of a misnomer, because really what's really going on is not white privilege, but it's Black disadvantage. And I'm not trying to say that every single person in America should get everything the same and that we should redistribute wealth to a degree that, we're giving equality of outcome, but I do believe that we should have equality of opportunity, and we do not have that. And so to not recognize that there is a huge group of Americans who are incredibly disadvantaged in many, many ways, and who have historically been, we have committed so many atrocities against Black individuals, and we're trying to deny that there's any racism in this country. And that doesn't allow us to heal. That just creates more of a divide. So now we come to the protesters. We have heard a lot of things about Antifa and about how Antifa is so dangerous. Antifa really first came onto the scene and became visible during a neo-Nazi rally that took place in Charlottesville. During that rally, someone was killed. They were run over by a car. So it must have been Antifa that did the killing, right? No, it actually wasn't. It was somebody who was there for the neo-Nazi rally. And Antifa stands for anti-fascist. And if we can't call Nazis fascists, who we went to war against in World War II, then fascism doesn't exist. Or maybe we've turned into a country where we can't talk about it, which that gets kind of scary, doesn't it? Because we have our free speech. So Antifa is saying that they were anti-fascists. Now there is a fact that you need to know about Antifa. There is no leadership. I'm going to say it again. The anti-fascists, there's no leadership. There's no membership. It's not official. It's people who are wanting to fight against white supremacy and fascism. And the Black Lives Matter movement, they have not gone to stand with Antifa, but rather these two groups are being confused and convoluted to make Black Lives Matter seem more frightening. For people who say all lives matter, maybe you mean well. Maybe you really do mean that every single life does matter. And that's true. I mean, after all, you're supposed to be pro-life, right? But unfortunately, right now, the way that policing is done in America, it is done in a way that says that Black lives don't matter. And that is what the movement is saying. It's not saying, hey, we want to come and dominate the white man. It's not even talking about how oppressed these people have been, which they have, and they have a right to be angry. But rather, all it's saying is, please recognize that we are humans that have lives that do matter. I mean, right now, we're treating escaped wild animals better than our Black fellow men, our fellow American countrymen. And that is why we have to say, no, if you are Black, your life does matter. All lives do matter. But a lot of the people who are saying that all lives matter, they're saying it against Black Lives Matter. We don't need to have a movement called White Lives Matter, because guess what? White lives, they do matter. They matter to the cops. They matter in many of the different political spheres. And then we run into these policing practices that are so horrific. I'm not saying that every single cop is terrible. I've met some wonderful cops. I'm not saying that people go into it for the wrong reasons, but I do know that the mental screenings that are done are minimal, and they are not done throughout their career. And as a police officer, you're gonna see some gnarly things, and that could mess you up mentally. And if you become traumatized, you do not need to be policing our streets anymore. I'm not trying to go and kill them. I'm not even trying to oppress the cops or be against them, but rather I'm saying we need to get a better police force where we need to test their mental stability. We need to train them better, because right now we train cops that if they feel frightened at all, they're allowed to use lethal force. Being frightened at all. But guess what? Being a cop is not even in the 10 most dangerous jobs in America. So sorry, I don't want to hear that you can go out and kill people with impunity just because you have a certain job. So, One thing that really frightens me is now the president and members of the Department of Justice are talking about how they want to call Antifa a terrorist organization. Calling someone a terrorist does several things. One, it takes away all your rights. You don't have a right to an attorney. You don't have a right to a reasonable trial, anything. When you're designated terrorist, your rights are gone. So it allows you to frighten these people, because if they go out and protest and Antifa, which doesn't have membership, is categorized as a terrorist movement, and Antifa has been seen as something that's a part of Black Lives Matter, even though those are two separate movements. They're just both about freeing American citizens from oppression. So designating Antifa as a terrorist organization is incredibly hurtful. You want to know how many deaths Antifa has been involved in, responsible for in the past 25 years? It's got to be a lot, right? I mean, because this young man just drove to Kenosha to shoot people, and on Fox News they're going, well, I mean, can you blame him? So Antifa must have killed a lot of people, right? 0. 25 years? 0. So I don't see the terrorist organization that is being talked about. Do you? Have you ever met a completely peaceful terrorist? That's something that would be new to me. This is a way to put dissenting individuals in prison. That is the number one thing that could kill our democracy. Because if you start to be able to arrest and deny due process to people who disagree with you politically, then that's not a democracy. That's the bottom line. Now, why do I say that there are people who have different political opinions? Well, one of the people that they focus on in their reporting about turning Antifa into a terrorist organization is they actually indicate that there is a gentleman who is supposedly a leader in this terrorist organization. And this is a person who is not a member, not a leader, and this is an individual who records videos and puts them online. That is a dissenting political viewpoint. And this specific person, the United States is trying to designate a terrorist, therefore taking away due process. And I don't know about you, but I do not want to live in a country where if you speak against your president, or if you talk about how you want to improve this country, if you point out genuine issues with society, then that is something that is purely meant to manufacture consent and silence individuals who try to speak and have a different political viewpoint. I wanted this channel to be about education. I never wanted it to be something that was full of name-calling or inflammatory rhetoric just for the purpose of being inflammatory. So I hate to say this, but unfortunately, I'm not exaggerating when I say that our democracy is completely at stake, especially with this whole designating Antifa, which has no membership and no leadership, a terrorist organization. You know, it's interesting because the FBI actually found that one of the biggest terrorist threats in America is actually right-wing radicalized individuals. Now, I'm not saying if you're right-wing, you're a terrible person, but it's down to the statistics. Majority of terrorist attacks have occurred from extreme right-wing individuals. One of the recent ones was actually a hardcore Trump supporter, but guess what? There's been more than one. And it's crazy to me that we actually politically took away money from the FBI and closed down the small part that was actually trying to track radicalized right-wingers. And it was done purely because of political, theatrical impressions that the ruling class wanted to make. Washington, D.C. is actually an incredible example of how we can handle these protests. The mayor of Washington, D.C. did something very, very brave. She actually painted Black Lives Matter leading up to the White House. It was actually visible from space, so that was pretty fun. But also, the mayor said, nope, I am not going to have militarized force here to agitate and to escalate things. And guess what? Protest went off without a hitch. Because as these injustices continue to be perpetrated against Black individuals, so as that happens and as we see these injustices done, these people who are already trying to protest being killed, now they have even more to protest, and they're angry. And you see these cops who are escorting, right-wingers who then drive directly into a crowd. There's just so much that's going on that's incredibly inflammatory. And I'm sorry, if you come up to a group of people and you just start attacking them, even if it's not with deadly force, you can't be surprised when somebody fights back or wants to throw all the tea into the harbor. Because this is an incredibly important moment in time. Right now, we have really the will of the public on our side. We have big corporations who are now saying, yes, Black Lives Matter. They do. They actually matter. That shouldn't be an inflammatory statement. I mean, take a second and think, what country are we living in where that statement could be seen as some sort of inflammatory statement? So let's get back to the concept of defunding the police. So, obviously, there's way too much money for military gear and equipment that's going into our police coffers. So what are we talking about when we say defund the police when it comes to an economic standpoint? We're not talking about austerity. We're not saying yank the money and bye-bye money. We're saying, okay, you do need cops. Maybe you need to train them better. Maybe we should even name them something else because of everything that's happened. I don't know, but we still do need that. But we also can have people who show up for different issues that don't necessarily require the police. If you have a mentally ill individual right now, if you have someone who's trying to commit suicide or somebody who's off their meds and they're acting erratically, you call the cops. Cops show up armed. That's already throwing a firecracker into the fire and hoping that the explosion doesn't hit you. So instead, to have trained mental health professionals that can show up and help in that situation. Then taking some of the money to actually help with schools, to help make them better, to make it more fair, to make it so that these kids have the ability to go to college and to move themselves out of poverty, because a ton of crime is just because of poverty. So then we take some money and we help with homeless shelters. We help with healthcare. You know, when there's a cat up in the tree, you know, sometimes you call the fire department for that. You know, you don't need to call the cops for everything. We're using them as the catch-all. And it's not working, it's making things worse. So there are so many different things that can help a community take away the anxiety and the desperation that people are feeling, that lead people to steal, that lead people to commit crimes. If we address the underlying issue, that makes it so that we are already moving towards a more peaceful and more just society. And guess what? For you wealthy people, it's better for you too, because things are not going to calm down until we address these issues, because they are important. This is literally life or death. You think it's going to go away if you just message that these people are crazy? You think it's going to go away just by sending in more and more and more military force? No, that's just going to create more unrest. And we have found in history that the more the middle class disappears and the more we have extremely wealthy people and extremely impoverished people, that is what has hurt countries in the past. That is what has led to many a fall from prominence and prosperity. It does start with the least of these, right? When we talk about needing cops to solve murders and rapes, things like that, we actually have a very low percentage of rapes that are actually solved. Cops are not spending as much time fighting real crime as we think. Unfortunately, cops are, right now, they're evicting people in mass evictions. That's not this video, that's a later one. But they are being used to support the socioeconomic inequalities in our communities. 5 people have the same amount of wealth as the bottom 50% of Americans. There are many, many societal ills that can be solved without military force. We have cops that are collecting regressive taxes through parking tickets and small speeding tickets, minor traffic infractions. We get a lot of money for our states through charging your average citizen, who is a law-abiding citizen for the most part, for small traffic violations or very, very small things like jaywalking. And we have a huge police presence to patrol the streets, but we don't have as many who are working on the real criminal issues in society. And I don't know anybody who hasn't gotten a speeding ticket at some point. Maybe I do, but I'm just not aware of it. I probably do. But most people, you at least get a speeding ticket during your life. Well, maybe, speeding tickets are definitely important when it comes to absurdly dangerous things, but they don't have to be so wildly expensive. They can be just reasonable, or if you're really doing something crazy and you really do put people's lives in jeopardy, well, that is different. But we are using cops to increase inequality in this country, and we're supposed to have liberty and justice for all. So America is a country of patriotic protesters. So now it is time for all of my fellow Americans, my fellow patriots, to let your voice be known. Protest peacefully. In Portland, they had a wall of mothers who came and linked arms to protect the protesters. And they were also greeted with this military force. And those pictures, that video, that made an impact. Now, because of the way our news cycle is, no one's talking about it anymore. And I assure you, this is still happening. It's not gone away. In the meantime, make your voice heard. Make your voice heard. Call your Congress people. Because our democracy is at stake. And you, as a patriotic and proud American, you fight. Fight for democracy. Because this might be our last chance. Be brave. Be nonviolent. Try and not do this property damage, even though, the Tea Party showed us that property damage is sometimes the only way that the uber wealthy ruling class who donates to politicians and makes the cogs of our system turn, that is sometimes the only way that people listen. But I am not saying that's a good idea. I'm just reminding you that seeing a chant or even a building on fire is nothing compared to the injustices that we have seen.
Slowly fading back, falling back towards Broadway, which is the street right behind us over here. This is the original standoff line. If you guys remember from back in the day, you'd have the police line, which they're getting ready to push. Here we go. That is trumpet.
We watched her.
She put her hand up. She put her hand up.
Right here. She's gonna come with us.
Don't hurt her. No, don't hurt her.
Hey,
don't
get her.
Okay, put your hands up. You better put the flashlight in her face. Yo, what the fuck? This is an unmarked car. Who is this? Who are you?
You follow us, you will get shot. You understand me?
What is happening?
Where's she going? Where's she going?
Where are you taking her? Where? You have to tell us where you're taking her. Where are you going? Where are you going?